I am Celia, 32 years old, and I used to take walking for granted. That changed during my brother Jason's 16th birthday, when a simple prank altered my life forever. My family dismissed my pain as attention-seeking drama, but a single MRI scan proved the truth and turned my parents into criminals overnight. Before I take you through the day that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to stay for how this story ends. Growing up in suburban Boston, my childhood looked picture perfect from the outside. My father, Robert, owned a successful construction company, while my mother, Linda, sold luxury real estate. My younger brother, Jason, completed our family of 4, but behind closed doors, our family dynamic was anything but perfect. From early on, it was clear that Jason was the golden child. My parents doted on him, excusing his behavior and praising his every achievement, no matter how small. Meanwhile, I felt like I was constantly fighting for scraps of their attention and approval. Jason quickly learned he could get away with almost anything. His pranks started small when we were kids, innocent things like hiding my toys or jumping out from behind doors to scare me. But as we grew older, his jokes became increasingly mean-spirited. He would put salt in my drinks, delete my homework files right before they were due, and spread embarrassing rumors about me at school. Whenever I complained to our parents, they had the same response. "He's just being a boy, Celia. Lighten up, it's just a joke." Their dismissal of my feelings became so normal that I stopped expecting support. To compensate for the lack of attention at home, I threw myself into academics. I maintained straight A's, joined every club I could, and volunteered at the local hospital on weekends. I hoped that if I became the perfect daughter, my parents might finally see me. They attended my award ceremonies and congratulated me on my achievements, but there was always a subtle comparison to Jason. "That's great, honey, but did you see how well Jason did in his soccer game yesterday?" By the time I was in high school, I had accepted that nothing I did would ever be enough. Instead, I focused on my dream of becoming a doctor. Medicine fascinated me, and helping others gave me the validation I couldn't get at home. I worked hard and got accepted to a prestigious pre-med program on a partial scholarship. Meanwhile, Jason's behavior worsened as he entered his teenage years. What once were annoying pranks evolved into genuinely concerning behavior. He started getting into trouble at school for bullying and disruptive behavior. My parents always found ways to excuse it, blaming bad influences or strict teachers rather than holding Jason accountable. Despite everything, I still loved my brother. There were moments when the Jason I knew as a little boy shone through, like when he defended me against a particularly nasty comment from a neighbor, or when he remembered my favorite ice cream flavor after I aced a difficult exam. These glimpses of kindness made his cruelty all the more confusing. I wanted to believe there was good in him, that he was just misguided by our parents' permissiveness. The weeks before his 16th birthday were particularly tense. Jason had been suspended from school for hacking into the grading system to change not just his grades, but those of several friends. Instead of punishing him, my parents hired an expensive lawyer who managed to keep the incident off his permanent record. They even bought him a new gaming system to cheer him up after such a difficult time. I was in my sophomore year of college when my parents called to remind me about Jason's upcoming birthday party. They didn't exactly ask if I could come home for it, they simply expected it. "You know how important this is to your brother," my mother said, her tone leaving no room for discussion. I had a major biology exam the following Monday, but I knew better than to argue. In my family, Jason's wants always trumped my needs. Little did I know that coming home for that weekend would change the course of my life forever. If I had stayed at college to study, perhaps I would be a doctor now instead of telling this story. But the past cannot be changed, only accepted and learned from. And I had so much to learn about my family myself and what it means to truly heal. I arrived home on Friday afternoon, the day before Jason's birthday party. Our house was already in full decoration mode, with my mother directing the setup of what looked like a small carnival in our backyard. There was a DJ booth, a photo area with professional lighting and caterers setting up near our pool. For a 16th birthday, it seemed excessive, but that was typical for Jason's celebrations. "Celia, you're finally here," my mother said when I walked through the door, not bothering to give me a hug. "Put your things away quickly and come help me with the goodie bags." I dragged my suitcase upstairs to my old bedroom, which looked exactly as I had left it when I went to college. Unlike Jason's room, which was regularly updated with the latest technology and decor, my suitcase remained frozen in time like a museum to my childhood rather than a space that still belonged to me. When I came back downstairs, my father was helping the pool service finish cleaning our large in-ground swimming pool. The backyard of our colonial-style home was spacious with a stamped concrete deck surrounding the kidney-shaped pool, a separate hot tub connected to the main pool by a small waterfall feature, and luxurious lounge chairs lined the perimeter. "Hey, Dad," I called out, waving. He looked up briefly. "Oh, hi, Celia. Good timing. Make sure your mother doesn't drive the party planners crazy, will you? No, how are you? Or how's school? Or it's good to see you. Just another task to complete." I swallowed my disappointment and went to find my mother. Jason came home later that evening with 3 friends I hadn't met before. They were loud, boisterous boys who carried themselves with the unearned confidence of teenagers who had never faced consequences for their actions. Jason introduced them quickly, Alex, Tyler, and Zach. They barely acknowledged me before heading to the basement game room. "Those are his new friends from the lacrosse team," my mother explained, beaming with pride. "Such nice boys from good families. The tall one, Tyler, his father, is a partner at Bingham and Ellis Law." What my mother meant was that they were wealthy and therefore acceptable companions for Jason. Whether they were actually nice boys seemed beside the point. Later I tried to connect with Jason when he came to the kitchen for snacks. "Hey, excited about tomorrow?" I asked, genuinely trying to share in his anticipation. He shrugged. "I guess. Mom's making it weird with all these decorations." It was the longest sentence he had spoken to me in months, so I pressed on. "What did you ask for this year?" A small smile appeared. "A car. Dad already said yes, but Mom's still pretending to think about it." Of course they were giving him a car. Never mind that I had to work 2 campus jobs to afford my used Honda that broke down every other month. I forced a smile. "That's awesome. What kind?" "A Jeep Wrangler, fully loaded." He grabbed a bowl of chips and turned to leave, then paused. "You staying the whole weekend?" "Yeah, I have to head back Sunday night for an exam Monday." He nodded, a strange expression crossing his face before he headed back to his friends. The morning of the party, I woke to the sounds of more preparations. Caterers arrived early, setting up elaborate food stations around the pool area. A barista had been hired to make custom coffee drinks, and a smoothie bar was being assembled next to it. The DJ was testing his equipment, and party staff were inflating dozens of balloons in blue and silver, Jason's favorite colors. My parents had outdone themselves with extravagance. I estimated they must have spent at least $20,000 on this party, possibly more. Meanwhile, they had complained about helping me with textbook costs just last month. By noon, the first guests were arriving. Jason's friends came in groups, most bringing expensive gifts. Our relatives showed up too, aunts and uncles and cousins, all exclaiming over how grown-up Jason looked. Several neighbors joined as well, adding to the crowd of about 50 people. I helped serve food and made small talk with relatives who asked the same questions about college and whether I had a boyfriend yet. Throughout it all, I kept an eye on Jason and his core group of friends, who seemed to be getting more rowdy as the afternoon progressed. They had started playing increasingly dangerous games around the pool, running despite the no running sign my father had installed years ago after a neighbor's child slipped and needed stitches. They were pushing each other dangerously close to the edge and doing cannonballs near younger kids. I approached my father, who was grilling with some of his friends. "Dad, don't you think the boys are getting a little wild near the pool? Someone could get hurt." He glanced over briefly. "They're just having fun, Celia. Don't be such a wet blanket. It's a party." "But they're running and pushing each other right by the edge. It's dangerous." My father sighed. "This is why you don't get invited to parties, honey. You're too uptight. Let them enjoy themselves. They're teenage boys, for God's sake." The dismissal stung, but it was familiar. I retreated to help my mother in the kitchen, preparing another round of snacks while keeping one eye on the pool area through the large French doors. That's when I noticed Jason and his 3 closest friends huddled together, whispering and occasionally looking in my direction. They were planning something, and based on past experience, I was likely the target. I should have trusted my instincts and stayed in the kitchen. I should have made up an excuse to go study in my room. But I didn't want to appear paranoid or give Jason the satisfaction of scaring me off. So when my mother asked me to bring a fresh tray of sliders out to the pool area, I agreed, despite the sense of foreboding growing in my stomach. I carefully balanced the heavy tray of mini burgers as I walked through the French doors toward the serving table by the pool. The weight of the tray required my full concentration, and I moved slowly to avoid dropping anything. The concrete pool deck was crowded with guests, requiring me to navigate carefully between groups of chatting adults and clusters of teenagers. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted Jason and his friends positioning themselves strategically around my path. They were trying to be subtle, but years of being the target of Jason's pranks had honed my awareness. Still with the tray in my hands, I had limited mobility and nowhere to retreat. I kept walking, hoping that whatever they planned wouldn't be too humiliating. I was about 10 feet from the serving table when it happened. Jason suddenly jumped out in front of me, wearing a grotesque mask, screaming at the top of his lungs. The jump scare itself might have been harmless, childish even. But as I startled and took a step back, my foot landed on something slick. Time seemed to slow down. I felt my foot slide out from under me, the tray tilting as I lost balance. I twisted awkwardly, instinctively, trying to avoid falling into the pool. Instead, I fell backward onto the concrete deck. The impact was instantaneous and devastating. A sickening crack echoed in my ears as my lower back slammed against the edge of the pool deck. Pain unlike anything I had ever experienced shot through my body. I screamed, the sound cutting through the party music and conversation. The tray of food clattered beside me, sliders scattering across the concrete. In those first moments, shock overpowered everything else. I lay there trying to catch my breath. Something was very wrong. I tried to sit up to move my legs to stand, but nothing happened. My brain sent the commands, but my lower body didn't respond. My legs! I gasped, panic rising in my throat. I can't move my legs! Jason and his friends were still laughing, high-fiving each other. I could see Tyler holding an empty bottle of cooking oil, the source of the slick spot I had stepped in. Their laughter faltered gradually as they realized I wasn't getting up. "Come on, stop being so dramatic," Jason said, his smile fading slightly. Guests had started to notice the commotion. Some moved closer, curious about what was happening. Others, seeing food on the ground, simply stepped around me to continue their conversations. My father pushed through the small crowd that had begun to form. His face was flushed with irritation rather than concern. "Walk it off! Stop being a baby!" My father yelled as I lay motionless on the ground. "You're embarrassing yourself and ruining Jason's party." I tried again to move my legs, to wiggle my toes, anything to prove him wrong. Nothing happened. Fear flooded through me. "Dad, I can't feel my legs," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm not joking. I can't move." My mother appeared beside him, her expression a mixture of annoyance and embarrassment. "Celia, that's enough," she hissed. "Everyone is staring. You're ruining Jason's special day with this attention-seeking behavior." Jason stood a few feet away, smirking at first, though uncertainty was beginning to creep into his expression. My mother put her arm around his shoulders protectively, as if I were somehow threatening him rather than lying injured on the ground. "Mom, please," I begged, tears streaming down my face now. "Something's really wrong. I need help. I can't feel anything below my waist." My father crossed his arms. "This is ridiculous. Get up now or go to your room. I'm not playing this game." A woman pushed through the gathering crowd, a neighbor I recognized as Maggie, a nurse from 2 houses down. She knelt beside me, her face serious. "Don't move her," she commanded immediately, taking control of the situation. "Celia, can you tell me exactly what happened?" Through tears, I explained the fall and the immediate loss of sensation and movement. Maggie gently placed her hand on my leg. "Can you feel this?" I shook my head. "Can you move your toes for me?" Again, nothing. Maggie looked up at my parents, her expression grave. "I'm calling an ambulance. She may have a spinal injury. Nobody touch or move her." My mother scoffed. "An ambulance? Don't be absurd. She's fine. Celia has always been dramatic." "Linda," Maggie said firmly, "your daughter cannot move her legs. This is a medical emergency." She was already dialing 911 on her cell phone. My father's expression finally began to shift from anger to uncertainty. Jason had gone pale, the smirk completely vanished now. He stared at me with growing horror as he began to realize this wasn't an act. "What did you do?" I heard my father ask him in a low voice. "It was just a joke," Jason mumbled. "We just wanted to scare her. We put some cooking oil on the ground so she would slip a little. It was supposed to be funny." As Maggie spoke urgently to the 911 operator, I lay there surrounded by party guests, who were now watching in uncomfortable silence. The music still played cheerfully in the background, a surreal contrast to the nightmare unfolding. I closed my eyes, trying to block it all out, praying this was just a temporary shock to my system and feeling would return any second. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The crack I had heard, the complete absence of sensation, the excruciating pain in my back, all pointed to something serious. And even as I faced this terrifying reality, what hurt almost as much was the automatic assumption from my parents that I was faking, that my pain was less important than a birthday party. In that moment, as I lay immobile on the concrete, I realized just how little they thought of me. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the awkward silence that had fallen over the party. Help was coming, but I already knew nothing would ever be the same again. The next 30 minutes were a blur of activity and intense fear. Paramedics arrived quickly, their faces serious, as Maggie briefed them on the situation. They worked with practiced efficiency, securing a cervical collar around my neck and carefully rolling me onto a backboard. A female paramedic named Sarah crouched beside me, her eyes kind but professional. "Celia, I'm going to check your responses okay." She ran through a series of tests, asking me to feel touches on my legs and feet to push against her hands with my feet. Nothing. With each failed test, her expression grew more concerned. "We need to transport immediately," she told her partner. Then, to everyone's surprise, she stepped away and made a call on her radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 17. We need police backup at our current location." My mother gasped. "Police? What on earth for?" "This was an accident." Sarah's expression was firm. "Ma'am, we have a young adult with what appears to be a serious spinal injury that resulted from what I'm being told was an intentional prank involving cooking oil placed on a pool deck. This requires documentation and investigation." My father stepped forward. His voice lowered to a threatening whisper. "Now listen here. This is a family matter. My son meant no harm. There's no need to involve the police." "Sir, please step back and let us do our job," Sarah replied calmly. "The police will sort out what happened. My concern right now is getting your daughter to the hospital immediately." As they prepared to load me into the ambulance, I heard my mother talking urgently to my father. "Robert, you stay here with Jason. I'll go with Celia." But it wasn't concern I heard in her voice, it was damage control. "Actually," Sarah interjected, "we need to move quickly. Family can follow in their own vehicle." To my shock and hurt, neither of my parents objected. As I was loaded into the ambulance, I saw my mother with her arm around Jason, who was now openly crying. My last view before the doors closed was of my father speaking intently to the guests, likely trying to salvage what remained of the party. In the ambulance, Sarah worked quickly, starting an IV and administering pain medication. The hospital has been notified, and they're preparing for your arrival. They'll do imaging right away to determine the extent of your injury. "Am I going to be paralyzed?" I asked, terrified of the answer, but needing to know. She squeezed my hand. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Spinal injuries can present with temporary loss of function due to swelling. The doctors will be able to tell you more after they see your scans." But her eyes didn't match her reassuring words. She knew this was serious. At the hospital, I was rushed directly to the emergency department where a team was waiting, a doctor named Dr. Ray. Reynolds took charge, quickly assessing my condition before ordering an immediate MRI. "Celia, I need to ask you exactly how this happened," he said. As nurses transferred me to a hospital bed, I explained about the prank, the oil on the ground, and the fall. I saw his expression darken. "And no one called an ambulance immediately?" "No, my parents thought I was faking." He exchanged glances with the nurse beside him. "I see. We're going to take good care of you, Celia. The MRI will tell us exactly what we're dealing with." Being wheeled into the MRI machine was terrifying. I had to lie completely still, fighting panic as the machine enclosed around me, making loud knocking and humming sounds as it imaged my spine. Alone in that tube, I couldn't stop the tears. What if I never walked again? What would happen to my dreams of becoming a doctor? How would I live? And perhaps most painfully, why hadn't my parents believed me? After the MRI, I was returned to a private room in the emergency department. A police officer was waiting there along with a woman who introduced herself as Dana, a hospital social worker. "Celia, I'd like to ask you some questions about what happened today, if that's okay," the officer said gently. Before I could answer, Dr. Reynolds returned his expression grave. He introduced himself to the officer, and Dana then turned to me. "Celia, I have your MRI results. You've sustained a serious injury to your thoracic spine, specifically at the T12 vertebra. There's damage to the spinal cord from the impact when you fell." The room seemed to spin around me. "What does that mean? Will I walk again?" He took a deep breath. "You have what we call an incomplete spinal cord injury. This means the cord isn't completely severed, which is positive news. However, there is significant damage. At this point, it's too early to make definitive prognoses about recovery. You'll need surgery to stabilize the vertebra, followed by intensive rehabilitation. So I could recover, eventually." I clung to any hope. Some patients with incomplete injuries do regain varying degrees of function, yes, but I want to be honest with you, this is a serious injury. Recovery will be a long road, and it's impossible to predict the exact outcome. As this devastating news sank in, my parents finally arrived. They entered the room looking flustered and defensive rather than concerned. "There you are," my mother said, as if I had wandered off on purpose. "What's going on? Why is there a police officer here?" Dr. Reynolds turned to them, his manner coolly professional. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, I'm Dr. Reynolds. I've been treating your daughter. Celia has suffered a severe spinal cord injury that will require immediate surgery and extensive rehabilitation. She currently has no motor function or sensation below the level of her injury." My father paled. "But that's temporary, right? She'll recover." As I was explaining to Celia, with this type of incomplete injury, some recovery may be possible, but the extent and timeline are impossible to predict at this stage. The police officer stepped forward. "I need to ask some questions about the circumstances of this injury." My father immediately became defensive. "This was just an unfortunate accident. Boys playing a harmless prank that went wrong. There's no need for police involvement." "Sir, when a serious injury occurs due to potentially negligent or deliberate actions, we have a duty to investigate," the officer explained calmly. At that moment, a commotion in the hallway caught our attention. Jason was arguing with another police officer who was escorting him into the room. He looked terrified. "I already told you what happened," he was saying, his voice cracking. "It was just supposed to be a joke." The officer with Jason looked at his colleague in my room. "The young man has made a statement. He and his friends deliberately poured cooking oil on the pool deck as a prank intending for his sister to slip." "It was just supposed to be funny," Jason protested, now crying openly. "I didn't mean for her to get hurt like this. We just wanted her to slip a little and maybe drop the food." My parents looked stricken. My mother immediately went to Jason, putting her arm around him protectively. "He's just a child. He didn't understand the consequences." Dana, the social worker, spoke up for the first time. "Mrs. Wilson, your son may not have intended the specific outcome, but this goes beyond a childish prank. More concerning to me is the report from paramedics and witnesses that you and your husband accused your daughter of faking her injury and delayed medical attention." "That's not fair," my mother protested. "We had no way of knowing how serious it was. Your neighbour, a registered nurse, told you it was serious and called an ambulance despite your objections," Dana replied evenly. "And from what Celia has told medical staff, this isn't the first time her concerns have been dismissed in favour of her brother." My father stepped toward Dana aggressively. "Now wait just a minute. What goes on in our family is none of your business." Dr. Reynolds interrupted. "Actually, Mr. Wilson, when it involves medical neglect of a patient, it very much becomes our business. Based on the reports from first responders and my evaluation of the delay in treatment, I've contacted Child Protective Services." "Child Protective Services? Celia is 20 years old," my mother exclaimed. "The incident involved a minor, your son," Dana explained. "And medical neglect of an adult child is still a reportable offence. The investigating officers will determine if criminal charges are appropriate." The word criminal hung in the air like a thunderclap. My parents looked truly shocked for the first time, not at my injury, but at the suggestion that they might face legal consequences. I lay there watching this unfold, feeling strangely detached. The pain medication was making everything seem slightly unreal. But through the haze, one thing was crystal clear. For the first time in my life, people were taking my side against my family. My injury was being treated as real and serious, and my parents couldn't dismiss or minimize it. There was a strange, sad vindication in that even as I faced the terrifying reality of my injury, the days following my diagnosis were a blur of medical interventions and emotional turmoil. I underwent surgery to stabilize my spine, spending hours in the operating room as surgeons carefully inserted metal rods and screws to support my damaged vertebra. When I awoke in the recovery room, the first sensation was pain, sharp and throbbing, radiating from my back. The second realization was that I still couldn't feel or move my legs. The hospital staff was incredible. My primary nurse, Elaine, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who managed my pain medication with military precision and didn't tolerate my occasional moments of self-pity. The physical therapists began working with me almost immediately, teaching me how to move safely and prevent pressure sores and blood clots complications I hadn't even considered. My parents' visits were awkward and tension-filled. They came together standing uncomfortably at the foot of my bed, my mother clutching her designer purse like a shield. They asked mechanical questions about my treatment plan, but avoided discussing the elephant in the room, the pending investigation, and possible charges against them. "We've hired you the best lawyers," my father informed me on their third visit. "Don't worry about anything. Just focus on getting better." Lawyers for me or for you? I asked pointedly. My father's expression hardened. This whole situation has gotten out of hand. The police are making this into something it isn't. Robert, my mother cautioned, glancing nervously at the door as if expecting someone to be listening. I learned from Dana that my parents were facing potential charges of medical neglect and contributing to the delinquency of a minor, the latter because they had encouraged Jason's behavior and failed to provide appropriate supervision at the party. Jason himself was being handled through juvenile proceedings, but my parents could face more serious consequences. Jason was only allowed supervised visits accompanied by my Aunt Meredith, my mother's sister. His first visit was heartbreaking. He stood at the doorway of my hospital room looking like he'd aged years and days. His eyes were red-rimmed and he couldn't look directly at me. "I'm sorry," he whispered the words barely audible. "I'm so sorry, Celia." Despite everything, my heart ached for him. "Come here," I said, patting the edge of my bed. He approached cautiously as if I might shatter at his touch. Aunt Meredith stayed back, giving us space but watching carefully. "I never meant for this to happen," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I thought it would be funny. I didn't think—" "You didn't think about consequences." I finished for him. "You never had to before." He nodded miserably. "They're saying I might have to go to a juvenile detention center, and Mom and Dad might go to jail." "I don't think it will come to that," I said, though honestly I had no idea what would happen. Part of me felt they deserved punishment, but another part worried about what would happen to Jason if our parents faced serious legal consequences. "I told the police everything," he continued. "About the prank, about how we planned it, about how Mom and Dad didn't believe you were really hurt." He looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time. "I'm going to make this right somehow, Celia. I promise." I wasn't sure how he could make this right, how anyone could. But I appreciated his sincerity. For perhaps the first time, Jason was truly seeing the impact of his actions without our parents' filter of excuses. As news of what happened spread through our extended family and community, reactions were mixed. Some relatives rallied around my parents, believing their version that this was all a terrible accident being blown out of proportion. Others were horrified by what had happened and offered their support to me. Most surprising was Aunt Meredith's response. She had always been close to my mother and had generally followed her lead in family matters. But after visiting me in the hospital and hearing the full story, she became one of my strongest advocates. "I've seen this pattern for years," she told me during one visit. "The way they favored Jason, the way they dismissed your feelings. I should have said something long ago, but Linda is my sister, and I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I was wrong." She became instrumental in my recovery, offering to help with medical bills when it became clear my insurance wouldn't cover all the specialized care I needed. She also stepped up to become Jason's temporary guardian when the court decided he needed supervision outside our parents' home. The financial reality of my situation was daunting. My medical bills were astronomical, and there was no way I could return to college immediately. My dreams of medical school seemed to be slipping away along with my mobility. A surprising bright spot emerged in the form of Michael, one of my physical therapists. He was about 30 with kind eyes and infinite patience. Unlike some of the staff who treated me with clinical detachment or overt pity, Michael treated me like a person first and a patient second. The body is remarkable in its ability to adapt and heal. He told me during one particularly frustrating therapy session when I couldn't complete an exercise. "But it works on its own timeline, not ours. Your job is to show up every day and put in the work even when it seems pointless." Michael had worked with many spinal cord injury patients and didn't sugarcoat the challenges ahead. But he also shared stories of patients who had made remarkable recoveries against medical predictions. Under his guidance, I began to see my rehabilitation not as a path back to my old life, but as a journey toward a new one. As I learned to use a wheelchair and adapted to my new physical limitations, I also experienced the loss of friends who couldn't handle the change in circumstances. College acquaintances sent flowers and cards, but stopped visiting after the first few weeks. Some high school friends seemed uncomfortable around me, not knowing what to say or how to act. But I also discovered a new support system among other patients in the rehabilitation centre. There was Marcus, a former construction worker who had fallen from a scaffold, and Sophia, who had been injured in a car accident. Despite our different backgrounds, we shared an understanding that no one else could fully grasp. We celebrated each other's small victories and provided support on the darkest days. Through it all, I grappled with complex emotions toward my family. There was anger at Jason for the prank at my parents, for their years of neglect and favoritism, and at the unfairness of it all. But there was also guilt, wondering if I could have somehow prevented this, if I should press charges against my own family, if I was wrong to feel a sense of vindication at their legal troubles. Dana, who continued to check in on me regularly, helped me navigate these conflicting emotions. "What happened to you was wrong on multiple levels," she said firmly. "You have every right to your feelings, including anger. But don't let that anger define your recovery. This is about your future now, not their past mistakes." With her help, I began to see that while I couldn't change what had happened, I did have some control over what came next. And slowly, painfully, I started to imagine a future different from the one I had planned, but perhaps no less meaningful. 6 months after the accident, I sat in a courtroom watching my parents stand before a judge. The criminal proceedings had moved forward despite their expensive legal team's efforts to have the charges dismissed. Both faced charges of medical neglect and reckless endangerment. The prosecutor described in clinical detail how their delay in seeking medical attention could have worsened my injury, how their pattern of favouring Jason and dismissing my concerns had created an environment where dangerous behaviour was normalised. My testimony had been difficult but necessary. I described not just the day of the accident, but years of incidents where Jason's pranks were encouraged and my feelings dismissed. I spoke about childhood injuries, ignored illnesses I was accused of faking, and the constant message that my brother's happiness was more important than my well-being. Looking at my parents across the courtroom, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and resolve. They appeared smaller somehow, my father's confident posture replaced with a defeated slump, my mother's perfectly maintained facade cracking under the weight of public scrutiny. The judge didn't send them to prison, which was a relief despite everything. Instead, they received a suspended sentence, 3 years of probation, and mandatory counselling. They were also ordered to pay for all medical expenses not covered by insurance, a financial burden that forced them to downsize their home and lifestyle. Jason's juvenile case resulted in probation, community service, and mandatory counselling. The court placed him temporarily with Aunt Meredith under close supervision. I worried about him, but was also hopeful that this intervention might set him on a better path. In the midst of these legal proceedings, I made a life-altering decision. After countless hours of physical therapy and consultations with various medical specialists, I decided to change my career path from medicine to physical therapy. The decision wasn't merely practical, though. Certainly my physical limitations would have made certain aspects of medical training challenging. Rather, it was born of a newfound purpose. Having experienced firsthand the crucial role of rehabilitation in recovery, I wanted to help others navigating similar journeys. With support from Michael, who had become both a mentor and friend, I researched programs that would accommodate my needs as a student with a disability. I found a university with an excellent physical therapy program and strong accessibility services. Aunt Meredith helped me secure an accessible apartment near campus, modified with wider doorways, lower countertops, and a roll-in shower. It was strange having my own place after months in the hospital and rehabilitation centre, liberating but also intimidating. "It's normal to feel anxious," Michael assured me during our final therapy session before I moved. "Independence after injury is a whole new skill set. Be patient with yourself." Returning to college was both familiar and entirely new. I had to navigate campus in a wheelchair, discovering which buildings had accessible entrances and which routes would avoid steep hills. I had to explain my situation to new professors and classmates, growing weary of the repeated questions, but also gradually becoming more comfortable with my story. Dating was another adjustment. My first tentative attempts were awkward, with some potential partners clearly uncomfortable with my disability, and others seeming interested only because they saw me as an inspiration, a perspective I found patronizing. But eventually, I met people who saw me as a complete person, neither defined by nor separate from my wheelchair. One unexpected joy came from adaptive sports. A classmate invited me to try wheelchair basketball, and though I was terrible at first, the physical challenge and camaraderie were exhilarating. For the first time since the accident, I felt the thrill of athletic competition, again discovering strengths I hadn't known I possessed. The most complicated aspect of my new life was navigating family relationships. Mandatory family therapy sessions were painfully awkward at first. My parents struggled to acknowledge their role in what had happened, defaulting to minimization and deflection until our therapist firmly redirected them. Jason made more earnest efforts. Removed from our parents' influence and with Aunt Meredith's more balanced guidance, he seemed to be maturing. He called regularly and visited when he could, each time more reflective and responsible than the last. "I've been reading about spinal cord injuries," he told me during one visit to my new apartment. "I want to understand what you're going through." This simple statement, this effort to educate himself about my experience, rather than centering his own feelings, showed me he was truly changing. My first year in the physical therapy program was challenging but rewarding. I found that my personal experience gave me insights other students lacked, though I was careful not to assume my journey was universal. Each patient's experience with disability is unique, a lesson I took to heart. I excelled academically, completing the year with honours, despite the additional challenges I faced. My professors were impressed, not just with my grades, but with my perspective on patient care, informed by both scientific knowledge and lived experience. As I approached the 1-year anniversary of the accident, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. There were still dark days when I mourned my lost mobility and the dreams I had abandoned. But increasingly, there were also days filled with purpose, new friendships, and a sense of identity that transcended my physical limitations. I was not the same Celia who had carried that tray of sliders to the pool a year earlier. I was stronger in ways I never would have chosen to be, but stronger nonetheless. And as I prepared to enter my second year of training, I understood that my injury had not merely changed my path, but had revealed aspects of myself I might never otherwise have discovered. 5 years have passed since that fateful day at the pool. Today I work as a physical therapist specializing in spinal cord injuries at a rehabilitation center in Boston. My journey has come full circle in many ways as I now guide others through the same process I experienced. My own mobility situation has improved somewhat over the years. With intensive therapy and determination, I regained limited function in my legs. I can now walk short distances with leg braces and forearm crutches, though I still use my wheelchair for longer distances and when fatigue sets in. Each small improvement was a victory, celebrated with tears and determination to push further. My relationship with Jason has transformed into something I never imagined possible. Now 21, he's studying psychology at university with plans to become a counsellor for at-risk youth. He volunteers regularly with disability organisations and has become an advocate for accessibility awareness on his campus. "Working with kids reminds me of how I was," he told me during a recent visit. "So many of them just need someone to believe in them and set boundaries at the same time." The transformation in my brother has been remarkable. The entitled, thoughtless teenager has grown into a compassionate young man with genuine empathy. We've developed a relationship based on mutual respect rather than the antagonism of our childhood. We'll never forget what happened, but we've found a way forward that honours both our shared past and our individual journeys. My relationship with my parents remains more complicated. After completing their court-mandated counselling, they made surface-level changes but never fully acknowledged the depth of their responsibility. They send birthday cards and occasional texts, and we see each other at major holidays, but our interactions remain formal and somewhat strained. "I wish things could have been different, Celia," my mother said during one Christmas dinner, the closest she's ever come to an apology. "So do I, Mum," I replied, not unkindly, but not offering absolution either. My father still struggles to look me in the eye when I use my wheelchair or braces as if my disability is a personal accusation. They've never fully escaped the shadow of their legal troubles, their social standing in the community, permanently altered. I've learnt to maintain healthy boundaries with them, accepting that they may never become the parents I needed them to be. My professional life has flourished in ways I never anticipated. I discovered that my combination of medical knowledge and personal experience makes me uniquely effective with patients facing similar challenges. I understand not just the physical aspects of recovery, but the emotional and psychological journey as well. "You got me through the darkest time of my life," a patient named Alicia told me recently as she prepared to leave the rehabilitation centre. "Not just because you knew what exercises would help, but because you showed me there's life after injury." Comments like these make every struggle worthwhile. I've found purpose in helping others navigate the difficult path I've walked, turning my trauma into something meaningful. My personal life has blossomed too. 3 years ago, I met David, a graphic designer, who saw me as a whole person from our first meeting. He never defined me by my disability, but also never pretended it didn't exist. We're engaged now, planning our wedding for next spring. "What I love about you isn't despite your injury, but including it," he told me once. "It shaped you into the strong, compassionate person you are." Beyond my immediate family, I've created a chosen family of friends and colleagues who provide the support and validation I lacked growing up. My Aunt Meredith remains a steadfast presence, more like a mother figure than an aunt in many ways. I've become an advocate for better medical response to suspected abuse and neglect, speaking at conferences about the importance of taking patients' reports of pain and injury seriously. At one such conference, I reconnected with Sarah the paramedic, who recognized the signs of neglect and called for police backup on the day of my injury. "I think about your case often," she told me over coffee. "It reminds me to trust my instincts and speak up even when it's uncomfortable." My healing journey hasn't been linear. There were dark periods of anger and bitterness, especially in those early years. I resented my family, the unfairness of it all, the futures I could no longer access. That anger was valid and necessary, but living in it permanently would have only caused more damage. Gradually, I learned to channel those emotions into more productive directions. The anger fueled my determination in rehabilitation. The sense of injustice sharpened my advocacy for others. The pain deepened my empathy for patients facing their own life-altering circumstances. Working with patients who have experienced both physical trauma and family neglect has become my specialty. I understand the complex interplay of physical and emotional healing, how recovery involves not just the body but the heart and mind as well. In an unexpected way, my injury redirected me to a path more fulfilling than the one I had originally planned. As a doctor, I might have helped many patients, but my connection with them would have been more limited. As a physical therapist with lived experience of disability and trauma, I offer something more personal and perhaps more powerful. Forgiveness has been an ongoing process rather than a single decision. Some days it comes easier than others. I've learned that forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened or pretending it didn't matter. It's about releasing the hold that anger has on my own life, about refusing to let past trauma dictate my future. The most profound lesson from my journey has been recognizing that my worth isn't determined by my family's perception of me. For years, I internalized their dismissal and favoritism, believing that if my own parents couldn't fully love and value me, perhaps I wasn't worthy of being loved and valued. Breaking free of that belief has been as important to my healing as any physical therapy. Now I build my life on my own terms, embracing both my capabilities and my limitations. I've learnt to ask for help when needed, something my prideful younger self struggled with. I've discovered strength and vulnerability in admitting when I'm struggling rather than trying to prove my independence at all costs. To anyone facing similar challenges, whether physical disability, family neglect, or both, I would say this: your path forward won't look like anyone else's. Some days, survival alone is victory. Build a support system of people who see and value you completely. Set boundaries that protect your well-being. Find purpose that transcends your circumstances. And above all, be gentle with yourself through the process. Has my journey been easy? Absolutely not. Would I choose this path if given the choice? Probably not. But this is the life I have, and I've learnt to make it a life worth living, rich with meaning, connection, and purpose. Life may have dealt me an unexpected hand, but I've learnt to play it with grace, determination, and even joy. And in that, perhaps lies the greatest victory of all. Have you ever faced a situation where people didn't believe you were truly hurt, either physically or emotionally? How did you handle it? Share your experience in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and healing. Remember, sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest sources of strength. Thank you for listening to my story.